Well, hi there. My name is Perry, and welcome to the Literary Niterary. So today I am here to film my April wrap-up. In April, I read 21 individual books, and I read one book twice. All right, after that, I read The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. I gave this one 4 stars with like all the caveats in the world. Like, I gave it 4 stars because to me 4 stars is a rating that means I really enjoyed something. Like, I was super emotionally involved in it while I was reading, and I definitely was with The Grace Year because it is so suspenseful. So I had to give it 4 stars because I was very, very invested. With all of that said, The Grace Year is a sort of fantasy dystopian where it's an extremely patriarchal and class segregated society, and when all the girls are about to turn 16, they get shipped off to an island in the woods or something to spend their 16th year because it's believed in this society that young women have magic, and that magic drives men insane with lust, basically, is the implication. Nobody's allowed to talk about the Grace Year, and nobody's allowed to talk about the magic, but all these girls get shipped off, and we know that not all of them come back. My quibbles with this book: the world building was extremely vague. I had no idea like where geographically this was supposed to be located. It's supposed to be in some version of our world because some of the characters speak snippets of Norwegian, I think. I looked it up, but now I don't remember. But it's also referenced that characters come from all over, so it's some sort of, am I supposed to be thinking of like a colony in America or somewhere else? I'm not sure. There's obviously 4 seasons, but you don't know how harsh those seasons are. As someone who went from sleeping outside in October in Maine to October in Virginia over the course of a few days, I can tell you that where you're located makes a difference on whether I buy that you're going to survive for a year in the wilderness with very few supplies. But yeah, that's just me, I don't know, as a camping person being like, well, hold on 1 minute. I did think this was a really good exploration of like girl-on-girl hate, and specifically the ways that patriarchal structures use the relationships between women to keep women in line. That's all really interesting. Without spoiling anything, there is a romantic element in this book that I, when it started happening, really did not think I was going to get on board with, and I understand why it had to happen the way that it did for the ending that the author wanted. And the author almost managed to convince me, like this close, she came really close to convincing me all the way that like in a society like this, falling in love by your own choice is a feminist action, is an inherently feminist action. But mostly I was like, A, why wasn't this book gayer? And B, did this book need a romance at all? Like, probably not. It was just to make something else happen. And that became clear by the end, but while it was happening, I really wasn't that invested in the romance. So overall, that kind of soured the book a little bit for me, that and the extremely vague world building. I wanted to know more about how the society got the way that it was. I wanted to know more about where they were located geographically. I just generally wanted more. But with all of that said, it was unputdownable, and I was extremely invested the entire time. Dark and creepy and twisty and good. The next book I finished in April was The Money Book for the Young, Fabulous, and Broke by Suze Orman. I didn't rate this, and I'm not going to talk about it a lot. If you need a book that's going to give you the basics of money, this one's pretty good. It is old. It is very old. It's probably out of date. A lot of factual information about money can't be counted on to stay the same for that amount of time, so I would definitely look for something more contemporary to supplement that if you need it. I don't think I was exactly the target audience for this book. I think I'm a little too young, but it was sort of a good primer to let me know what's coming down the pipeline over the next 10 to 20 years. The next book I finished was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, which was an extremely hyped thriller of last year, and I gave it 3 stars. Pros about this book: the voice was very strong, the narrative voice was extremely strong, to the point where I was hearing in my head like an older middle-aged, like stuffy British guy doing the narration before I even knew like the gender of the protagonist, and normally all I ever hear is my own like internal voice talking to me, so that was interesting. I thought it was really well written. I thought the voice was really strong. Other than that, I don't really want to get too far into it, but it was just okay for me plot-wise. Basically, I think my biggest critique of the book is that the most interesting character is obviously the silent patient from the title, this woman, and we don't really see a lot of her. We don't get or we see a lot of her, but we don't get that much information about her inner life, which I think is sort of the point of the book, is that she's sort of this closed off vessel that nothing's coming out of. It was just kind of an icky thing about the book for me, that we spend so much time inside such a convincingly rendered portrait of the mental space of this one male character, when the female character, who the story is really about, we know almost nothing about what she thinks or feels, and that didn't sit right with me. I think it could have been a much stronger book if it had been differently centered. It was entertaining, it passed the time. All right, the next book I read was The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee, and this was probably my favorite fictional book that I read in April. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I loved it. So this is a YA historical novel set in the Reconstruction era South, and the sort of the hook of the book is that it follows a young Chinese American girl who has a job as a servant by day, but by night, or sort of on the sly, she writes this progressive, humorous advice column under the pseudonym Miss Sweetie for the local newspaper, and there's a bunch of other things going on as well. I thought this book was amazing. It was extremely well written. There was a great sense of atmosphere. There was an extremely self-possessed central female character. There was conversation about why intersectionalism was necessary then and why it's necessary now. There's a subplot with the women's suffrage movement, which historically was extremely unwelcoming and dismissive of the concerns of women of color, because basically they believed it would hold them back in getting the vote for white women, which was kind of scummy, to put it mildly. So the book did a really good job of demonstrating, without being preachy, that things like class and race make a huge difference in the way you talk about gender, and things like gender make a huge difference in the way you talk about things like race, and so on and so forth. I thought this book was beautifully plotted. There were things that I wasn't expecting to be relevant early in the book that I thought were just sort of there to provide like detail or character, and then you get to the end of the book and it would turn out to be relevant, which is just an extremely satisfying feeling. It's sort of a found family story. It's a story about finding your purpose and about hope and empowerment and relationships between women, and it was really, really good. I like wholeheartedly recommend this book, especially if, like me, you love historical fiction, but you're finding large, chunky, adult historical fiction a little bit challenging to get into in your current mental state, or just a little inaccessible right now. This was really accessible historical fiction, and I loved it to pieces. So next I read Summer of Salt by Katrina Leno, which is a book I've been anticipating for years, and there's no reason that I haven't read it up until now, but now I have read it and it was great. I gave it 4 stars. This book is set on the island of By the Sea, and it follows this family that are sort of, like, nobody's gonna call them witches, but like everybody kind of knows that they're witches. All the women in the family get magical powers, except our protagonist, Georgina, doesn't have her powers yet. And she's not sure she's ever gonna get them. And this is just a beautiful little story about, again, relationships between women, her relationship with her twin sister, which I just thought was beautiful, and complicated and really real. Her relationship with her mother, ditto. Her relationship with her best friend, and her relationship with a new romantic prospect who comes to the island for the summer. And it was all just really sweet. Sweet is almost the wrong word because it makes you think that the whole book is light when it's really not. I thought it was a contemporary romance that would be centered on the female-female relationship, but it really isn't. It's a little more plot-driven than that, and there is some darker content, including content warnings for rape. So maybe a better word than sweet is magical. It was a really magical book. The atmosphere was delicious. It made me feel like I was by the ocean. It's sort of whimsical, just really, really beautiful, really moving story about all the different things women can be and things women can be to each other. And I thought it was great. I gave it 4 stars. After that, I read Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez, which is a young adult fantasy inspired by Bolivian history and culture. I really liked this one too. I gave it 4 stars. It's about the conflict between 2 groups whose names I have forgotten, but basically the group that our main character belongs to has been thrown out of power some years before through an incredibly bloody and violent revolution, and they're now dispossessed of their land. They're living off on the fringes of this little area. I'm so sorry. And basically when the new king invites the old contessa to be his bride, our main character, who is the Condessa's decoy, goes in her stead, and then as soon as she gets to the city, begins to question her own prejudices and biases and everything she's been taught, and starts trying to figure out what really happened in this divided country and what the best way to move forward is. And I thought this was really, really well done. It was funny because in the first sort of 10% of the book, the main character would think something and I'd be like, that's kind of weird and one-dimensional and almost prejudiced. Like, that's kind of weird that she would think that way. I wonder where this is going. And the answer is, of course, that it's set up to be challenged. And that's sort of the central thread of the book. So this book had a really nuanced and thorough discussion of prejudice and bias and how those things are formed and how we can work to overcome them. I loved the magic system. The magic system is really unique and I just loved it to pieces. And at the end of the day, it has a really hopeful message for like building a kinder and better world. So yeah, I recommend it. After that, I read The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg. This is a book about how habits are formed. I gave it 4 stars, I really liked it. It reminded me of Freakonomics, but with a little bit of practical advice sprinkled through, which was great. My take is that if you're mostly looking for a self-help book, this is not the one to pick up. Look for something that's a little more self-help focused. This was almost sort of a pop science book with a lot of case studies, with advice about how to change your own habits sort of sprinkled throughout. But I found the case studies really interesting. My favorite was the one about how Target tracks consumer data. I really liked that part of the book, so I gave it 4 stars. Helpful in a practical sense, entertaining in a learning new things sense. What could be better? Okay, we're in the home stretch here, guys. After that, I read First and Then by Emma Mills, and I gave it 3 stars. This was really interesting to me because I actually used to follow Emma Mills when she made YouTube videos on the channel Elmify. That was the first YouTube channel I ever subscribed to. And I thought she was adorable and great, and I still think she's adorable and great. This book was adorable. I don't know that it was great. It was not perfectly executed. It's basically a contemporary high school retelling of Pride and Prejudice, which is right up my alley. It's so far up my alley that it's inside my house, practically. Things I really liked about this: the developing sibling relationship between the main character and her cousin who has come to live with them. I thought that was really cute and sweet, and I liked it. I'm a sucker for sibling relationships. I think you'll see that a lot going forward. Really liked the sort of slow burn romance, and I liked obviously tracing the sort of retelling elements as they factored into the book. My criticism of the book is also sort of along those lines. I felt like the book ended really abruptly with a lot of things sort of unfinished. And one of those things was that I was expecting sort of a main plot element of Pride and Prejudice. One might even say one of the climactic events of Pride and Prejudice. I was seeing groundwork being laid for it in the book, and then it just didn't happen. And that made the book feel really unfinished to me. I was like, wait, but what about this very important plot event from Pride and Prejudice? Because I thought I had called it, and then it didn't appear at all. Which is, I mean, not a fault of the book. If the book wasn't trying to put it in there, then I can't fault it for not having it be in there. But in general, in conjunction with the other things that sort of felt unfinished or only lightly dealt with, characters who are only in 2 scenes, or characters have really serious things going on in their lives but are not explored in depth, I had questions about. But at its core, I can also see that this is a book about a girl who doesn't have anything that serious going on in her life at the moment, because some teens luck out and they don't have anything that serious going on in their lives, but she is around a lot of people who do have serious things going on in their lives, and she's trying to learn how to be a good friend to them. And I think that's definitely valuable. The other thing I wanted to say about this book is that if you start reading it and it seems like there's like some girl hate or some slut shaming, I just wanted to let you know that that is challenged. And I actually think that that was sort of a smart way to approach the like Lizzie Bennet type character, because we don't tend to see Lizzie this way, but I firmly believe that, especially in the first half of Pride and Prejudice, if you asked her, she would be like, oh yeah, I'm not like other girls. So I think this characterization of Devon to kind of be the same way is actually kind of on point. So yeah, if that's really bothering you, obviously like you don't have to stick it out, but it's not going to be like that forever. It's not like that's what the author thinks about women. Okay, the second to last book that I read in April was Recipe for a Perfect Wife by Karma Brown, and this was definitely my biggest disappointment of the month because this was a book that I should have loved. This book was set up to be like the perfect book for me. It's a dual timeline book where half of it takes place basically in the present and half of it takes place in the past. It follows 2 women who are living in the same house but not at the same time. One of them, the first one, Nellie, is a 50s housewife basically, but she's having problems with her marriage. And then the other one is now used to work but is now unemployed, so she's around the house all the time while her husband goes to work in the city, and she is also having problems with her marriage. That was not elegantly explained. But basically, the present day woman finds some magazines and a cookbook and some letters that belong to the 1950s woman, and she becomes fascinated with her life. This really didn't do what I wanted it to do, and I'm sad. So this book could have gone in a couple different directions that would have really satisfied me, but it didn't go in any of them, so it didn't really satisfy me. I feel like the parallel between the past woman and the present woman isn't drawn that well, because I feel like you really can't compare what's going on in their two marriages accurately. And I think that part of the project of the book was to say that, like, the outsized expectations that society placed on women in the 50s, for example, have way more connection to the expectations we place on women today than we probably like to think. Like, we would look at a lot of expectations that we place on women today and be like, but that's totally reasonable, that's fine. So I think what this was supposed to do was highlight through comparison that, like, maybe it's not fine, which is an admirable project, but, like, without spoiling anything too significant, the 1950s woman husband is a caricature of an abusive beast of a person. So I had no sympathy for him. The present day woman's husband seemed like a guy who was kind of trying his best and was occasionally passive aggressive or had a little bit of internalized misogyny going on, but wasn't like a violent, terrible person. So putting those two things in parallel just made me go, well, but is it? Especially because basically I think if the book had been written the way that the blurb promised me it had been written, I would have been super down, would have been super good. But the present day woman doesn't even have the moral high ground when the book opens, because from the very beginning of the book, she's hiding very significant things. She's lying to her husband. And then she's like, oh, my marriage is bad. Weird. I wonder if there's anything anyone could do about that. So, like, when Nellie, the 1950s woman, lies to her husband, you see that it's an attempt to directly preserve her physical and emotional safety, and you're like, okay, go on and do that. When the modern day woman lies to her husband, you're like, well, I mean, if you had an adult conversation about this, it might go better than you think. Like, I don't know. And then I was sort of expecting the modern day woman, then, if it wasn't gonna be her discovering empowerment in a way to break out of a truly bad relationship, which was not what the book is about. I thought it was going to be about her getting sort of obsessed with the ghost of this woman who lived in her house, going really far down that rabbit hole and doing some, like, crazy things. But I don't think it got that dark to sort of fulfill that tonal promise either. So yeah, I was just really disappointed. I also didn't like that the modern day woman was so passive. She was so passive as a character. She didn't try to find things out, for example, really, about the woman who used to live in her house. She just sort of stumbled upon things, and then she was like, oh, this is so interesting, I'm so interested in this, and then she wouldn't look for any more information. Like, I wanted her to get obsessed, you know, if that's where the book was gonna go, but then it didn't. I think this could have been written as a thriller, but I don't think it was, and even if it was, I called what would have been the twist really early in the book, and then it turned out I was right. Like, this was just so disappointing, and so disappointing because it was the perfect premise. It was the book of my dreams, and now my dreams are all broken, and I'm sad. I gave it 3 stars, but I kind of want to give it like a 2-star or a 2.5 star, but I think that's just because I expected it to really be a 5-star, and then it really wasn't. It's probably fine. It's just disappointment that's clouding my opinion. So unhype yourself and then read this book, or don't. It was really just okay. And the final book that I read in April was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, another extremely hyped thriller. This one was interesting. I have read The Turn of the Screw, and I liked it, and I liked the sort of resonance between those two texts. Probably need to think about that some more before I can say anything intelligent about it. So this one is about a young woman who works in childcare, and she sees a post for a live-in nanny for a family with 4 daughters, and she decides to take it. She interviews for the job, she gets the job, and then she finds out that the last 4 nannies have left because they think the house is haunted. And also it's a smart house, This was okay. Again, a thriller where I think the strongest thing about it was the voice. The character's voice worked really well for me. The sort of conceit of the book is that it's epistolary and she's writing a lawyer letters from prison. And you know at the beginning that, again, this is the whole setup, that she's a nanny and that she killed one of the children, or that she's been accused of killing one of the children that she was working with. This was another one where maybe I need to get my generous reader hat back out and stop being so critical and trying to guess what a book is going to do, but this was another one where I guessed what the book was going to do. I guessed one of the big reveals really, really early in the book, and then it wasn't revealed until really, really late in the book, and I was like, yeah, I knew that already. I've known that the whole time. I feel like making it a smart house was interesting and gave more potential for sort of spooky things to happen, like, you know, when terrifying sounds start playing over the speakers in the middle of the night, sort of thing. But I don't think the concept of the smart house was fully explored. The way that it sort of is in like that Ray Bradbury story, The Veldt. That's kind of where I almost thought this was gonna go, but that's not where it went. Good things. Really great at building a sense of suspense. Creepy kids are always creepy. I was creeped out. I was on the edge of my seat. I wanted to know what happened. And again, the voice was really strong, but the actual plot itself didn't really deliver. There were just some things that I wish had been explored a little more thoroughly. And I think some possibilities other than the one that turns out to be true that could have been even more interesting. So yeah, but it was entertaining. It was a great way to spend a couple of days. 3 stars. All right, and that should do it. That is all of the books that I read in April. Thank you for sticking around through this absolute marathon. I am exhausted. I can only assume that you are also exhausted. However, I hope you're exhausted in a good way. Let me know in the comments what the best book you read in April was, or whether you had any extremely disappointing reads in April like I did. And I hope you're staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I hope that there's a great book waiting somewhere just for you. Bye!